Hi, Phil. Thanks for joining. Appreciate your time. And everyone, we got Phil here with Healthcare Blocks. Thanks for joining.
Hey, Chad. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, so the company was started 7 years ago and really, focused initially on a lot of smaller companies who, were creating some really innovative products for the healthcare marketplace, but, had small teams and didn't necessarily have the depth to deal with HIPAA compliance and security and, how to do all that in the context of cloud hosting. So, we put together, a variety of services for those types of customers, and then over the years, expanded our offering to include, services for larger organizations. Yeah, we tend to see certain patterns, that you have either companies that it's their first time developing something for the healthcare market, so they're familiar how to do things. But, when you add HIPAA into the mix, it becomes more challenging. And so they're afraid that they're going to miss something and, put themselves in a position that they might have a breach. And then there's also another type of customer we deal with where they've been in healthcare for a long time, but cloud is new to them. They know how to do everything on premise. And now when you're starting to put your trust into another vendor, and especially Amazon Web Services, they want to feel comfortable that, we're doing everything correctly for them. And that if they bring in an auditor or do a risk assessment, that they can pass, through that audit with flying colors. So different types of customers, different needs, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about us helping them navigate through those, complexities, which includes, systems administration, DevOps, strengthening their so-called security posture, and so on. You can go directly to someone like an AWS, Amazon Web Services, but there's quite a lot of work, your organization is going to be burdened with to really be HIPAA compliant and to deal with the daily security threats that are out there. So we help organizations deal with a lot of that. We've had customers that were as small as like 2 people, early stage CTO, co-founder, and a developer, and, limited budget, but they have a very interesting product. But the thing is, they have to start small. They have to, run that product as, limited trial. Maybe they're trying to attract some investors, who knows, but clearly they don't have, the money or even the time to really, create a fully HIPAA compliant environment for their infrastructure. That's where we come in. And so we've always made it very easy for small organizations to, be clients. And then of course, as they scale over time and they, have a lot of success getting, customers and driving revenue, then obviously they're using more servers. And so, we have some customers that are running, 30 to 40 servers with multiple applications, databases, and, tons of so-called patient lives represented in their medical records that are in our platform. So we can accommodate to different size, companies and different size teams. So we have some companies where they have their own security team that works, in a complementary fashion to what we do. And, they're reviewing things that we do for them, but they're not as deeply involved as they would be if they're doing everything on their own directly. Yeah, so what we do is we align our, implementation and the way we set up, let's say servers for clients. We align ourselves with several recognized standards, and so SOC 2 is one of those standards. Amazon Web Services, they have their own security framework called Foundations. So we ensure that a customer's AWS environment, is compliant with that. HIPAA itself is not very prescriptive, unfortunately. So there are a lot of different, so-called consultants that, are out there trying to, pawn off their own certifications and whatnot. But because we've worked with a lot of healthcare organizations, we have come across many, chief information officers, security officers that have shared with us their organization's requirements. And so we've sort of developed our own kind of meta framework across the healthcare industry that, matches up with, high trust, SOC 2, AWS Foundation. So the point being that a customer's environment is going to be very secure when they work with us. But if that customer also needs to go through a formal SOC 2 audit or a high trust certification process, we're helping them save a lot of time by having all the right controls in place. And I can't stress this enough, but security is a big deal. As you mentioned, the daily threats that are out there are getting more and more sophisticated. And sometimes, our customers are working with developers that might not have a lot of deep experience in security. They don't understand the threats that are out there. And so, a lot of times those problems start with, your resources and their lack of knowledge. And so we help, create a buffer there. And not only do we provide some training, but also the systems that we implement are looking at real-time threats. They're looking at things like data exfiltration, making sure data doesn't, leave where it's, supposed to be, among many other, things that sort of fall in that security bucket.
Yeah, and kind of back to the startup or the small business, the statistics now that we're reading and hearing is over 72% of all attacks are happening to small businesses, though they're the largest target. And so the bad guys have gone from focusing on the big hits, the big money, to a lot of little money, and hardening their infrastructures and securing their infrastructures are the most important thing right now.
Yeah, and as the attacks get more sophisticated, the standards for security also evolve, and so that's the other problem we've seen over the years is that a customer implements an application and they have some authentication for, let's say, username, password, and they don't realize that needs to be revisited on an annual basis at least to see if any changes need to be made. So going back to passwords, great example, years ago, recommended minimum password length was, I think it was like 5 or 6 characters. And I think now the recommended government standard is like 14 or 16, and so that, and, you see multi-factor authentication being very common in a lot of online services you use. So of course, our customers are trying to implement that in their own apps, and even multi-factor authentication keeps changing. It used to be, hey, you can just use, text messages, right? But then a lot of people have their text messages coming back to the same device that they're working off of. So now you're looking at, other ways to authenticate. So little sidebar, but yeah, it's a good example of some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis in terms of advice, implementation advice, and just making sure customers are on the right path there. Yeah, so there's sort of two aspects to that. One is, by working with us to, get started, we're helping, a lot of these organizations save at least a few months of effort of not having to go into, someone like Amazon Web Services and figure out, everything they have to do and then implement all those things. And then there are a lot of ongoing tasks that we handle. And so that's going to be at least 1 or 2 FTEs that we help these organizations not have to then deal with. But then when you look beyond, that operational environment that we manage for customers, there are a lot of other things that we don't do, and we rely on our partners. And so when we start looking at something like a risk assessment, HIPAA, among some of these other frameworks like SOC 2, they want companies to do an annual risk assessment, which involves looking at not just your cloud environment, but your on-premise environment, how you hire and train employees and contractors. If you're receiving data or sending it, how are you doing that? So a lot of different things are covered during those annual risk assessments. And that's something that, clearly PulseOne is capable of doing for our clients. Other services like penetration testing, looking at, is your application vulnerable, kind of putting on putting yourself into the seat of a hacker and trying to break into that system without knowing anything about it. That's another thing that PulseOne can assist our clients with. So there are a lot of those kinds of synergistic opportunities where we can't do everything,
Yeah.
and be good at it. We want to focus on something very specific, but PulseOne clearly has resources and services around those other aspects.
So we have a mutual relationship, toxicology management services, and they have a pretty neat story. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so TMS, as they're referred to, they were one of our first clients, and when we started working with them, they were developing their primary product, which is a cloud-based lab testing service that is, and they are plugged into a bunch of labs in the U.S. and their clients are doctors' offices that need different kinds of lab testing services. So when they started working with us, they wanted to run their product in the cloud, and they knew HIPAA compliance was a requirement, but they didn't want to deal with all the nuances of it. So we helped them navigate that path. We helped them even with some integration in their product. We brought in some development resources for them, but they launched with us on Amazon Web Services, and 7 years later, they're still a client, and they've grown significantly. They have tons of customers, and they're doing well. And periodically, they touch base with us on some new product line expansion that they're doing, which then stirs up a lot of questions about, okay, from a compliance standpoint and security, here, what do we need to be worried about? So it's a great example of how a startup can blossom, in our relationship. We have plenty of those on our platform, as well as some, larger organizations that they did move all their infrastructure over to us, but they decided to build some new product that they wanted to go cloud first with that product, and instead of trying to figure out how to run it on their outdated infrastructure. And so that's kind of what we're seeing in general. We're seeing a lot of healthcare organizations that are very well established, very well known organizations that they've been moving towards the cloud, but kind of stepping stone at a time through a lot of these smaller projects first. And once they feel comfortable as an organization, once their security team feels good about it, that's when they start making bigger, decisions. Well, we're not going to renew a lease on these old servers at this co-location center. We're going to do everything, in AWS or Azure or wherever that may be for them. So it's a good sign for the healthcare market. If you're in the healthcare industry, whether you're a healthcare app developer or some kind of a vendor in that capacity, I think there will be a lot of opportunities over the next 10 to 15 years. Quite a lot of organizations, especially smaller healthcare clinics, they have a lot of on-premise systems, desktop servers, and some of those are running their patient management apps like on-premise there. Some of those are just running their back office, but we kind of draw a boundary where we say our specialty is in the cloud, but there are a lot of risks with your on-premise system. You have employees coming in and logging in, and what else are they doing? And they're bringing their mobile devices into the workplace. So no matter how secure your cloud environment is, if you've got any kind of weaknesses on-premise, those could be sort of a hidden backdoor to data theft or malware, ransomware, all that fun stuff. So that's where PulseOne comes into the picture, because you guys can really go in and do a risk assessment. You can help modernize the back office systems, look at antivirus malware solutions, and really help cover that whole range of risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Phil, for your time. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for the opportunity to talk with you.